Hey there everybody, welcome back to our cinema recaps. Today we're going to be looking at the 2019 supernatural horror film, The Hole in the Ground. Spoilers ahead. When Sarah takes a notice of her son, Christopher, acting differently, she finds herself trying to convince everyone that she's not going crazy, while trying to understand what's really happening to her son. So we open up on Sarah, looking at her son making faces in a funhouse mirror. He's happy and she fakes a smile before joining him. They walk through the amusement park, cotton candy in hand, before heading onto the car and leaving. They drive along the Irish countryside towards their relatively new home, which is down the long road surrounded by the forest. So while driving, the two are talking before nearly hitting something. Sarah swerves to avoid whatever was on the road, slightly damaging the car in the process. She tells Chris to stay in the car as she gets out to see if the person's okay. Now the person she approaches is strange and unresponsive.
Don't move.
She grabs her mirror slowly, staring at the woman who then turns to look at Christopher. She runs back to the car, eager to get the hell out of there. So now we see Sarah trying to make some cosmetic improvements at home while Christopher eats his food and plays. She tells him to eat, but he's refusing. She's counting down. And when they get to 1, they both pull funny faces at one another. She goes back to her housework before going downstairs to the basement to get a scraper. But here's a noise upstairs. She runs up in a panic, and it quickly dawns on her that it's just a spider. She lets it go and Christopher asks why she won't kill it, after telling him that the spider didn't do anything wrong.
What'd she ever do to you?
He pulls the typical kid move of evoking his father and informing her he'd have killed it. She tells him sternly that she's not his father, and then he begins asking why he didn't come with them to this new house. She says it's not that simple, and he starts calling her a liar. After releasing the spider, he kills it, calls her a liar once again, and runs off. So she's chasing after him and running into a creepy forest because that's a great idea. And now she's scared, but where is he? She stops before hearing a scream, and she continues running until she comes across a massive hole in the ground. Her intense focus on the hole is interrupted when Chris calls out for her. She runs over and hugs him. His tune has drastically changed, saying that he knows his dad makes her sad. He asked what the hole was about, but she didn't say anything before returning home.
What is that?
Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, or Slender Man will haunt your dreams. Now after falling asleep on the couch, Sarah wakes up to the sound of the TV and gets up to get some water. She notices the door open, goes to close it, and then checks on Christopher, giving him his bear before watching him sleep. Now the following day, Sarah picks up her son from school, but notices that he seems sad as hell. She sees the talent show sign-up sheet and tells him he should do it so he can make new friends. But he says he doesn't want new friends. She tries to convince him that it'll make him happy in their new environment, but he's not convinced. So at dinner that night, Sarah's with her friends. They start talking about the crazy lady, Noreen, who lives close to Sarah, and she realizes it's the same person she encountered on the road. She's told about how the old woman went insane at her son's school one day and later murdered her child after escaping.
No.
So later that night, Sarah's woken up by a slamming door. She sits up groggily for a moment before another door slams. She goes to inspect this noise and notices that Christopher isn't in bed. The doors keep slamming and she goes to check out the sounds to find the back door swaying in the wind. Outside, she's looking for Christopher but can't find him. So she walks into the woods, getting worried by the minute. She calls out for him before running out of the woods and back to her home. So she ends up calling emergency services, telling them her son's missing. But then he appears behind her out of nowhere, as if he was always there. She asks him where he was and he replies that he was there the whole time. So the next day, a doctor comes to inspect her, but he asks about her scar, and she reluctantly shows him, telling him that it was an accident a year ago. He gives her medication to take every night before bed, and to tell him how she feels after a few weeks.
This is 3 weeks worth.
And that night, after making dinner for her and Chris, she calls out to him to come and eat, and she's surprised to find him there almost instantly, as if out of character. She takes her pills that night, and the following day wakes up to Christopher sitting there holding flowers. She tells him that he's not meant to go outside without her, and he says he just wanted to surprise her. Feeling bad, she looks at the flowers and thanks him. So she's watching Chris with new friends at school, a far cry from his attitude towards friends not too long ago. And on their way home, they come across Noreen again, this time wandering the road while dressed in white. She stops and turns to face him. Freaky. They walk towards him like a zombie and stop just in front of the car. Sarah's honking her horn before getting out and asking her to get out of the road. Noreen mumbles to herself, looking over at Chris before telling Sarah that it's not her boy. Noreen's husband, Des, comes and fetches Noreen, apologizing for her wandering away and scaring him.
It's not your boy.
Noreen goes towards the car and stares at Chris before breaking out in a fit. She hits the car and says that it's not her son repeatedly before hitting her head on the window. Finally, Des pulls her away and Sarah hurriedly speeds off, clearly freaked out about what just happened. Now, the following day, on the way to drop off Chris at school, she stops by Noreen's and Des's home, only to find Noreen dead. Now back at home, the police officer recounts what she said happened while she watches Chris arm wrestle another officer. She begins to see things that don't actually happen, like Chris breaking the officer's hand. But when she snaps out of it, she sees a normal kid struggling to win an arm wrestling competition. So after a shower, she dries off her hair and finds blood on her towel. She touches her scar and shows more blood on her fingers. Now in town, as she's going to work, her friend and boss says that she should have taken more time off to recover, but Sarah argues that she was going crazy cooped up at home.
Must have been quite a shock.
Her friend asks about what happened, but realizes it's inappropriate. Sarah brushes it off and asks if she ever doesn't recognize her own children. The response doesn't make her happy, as it's a generic parent answer. She then rephrases the question and says more about personality differences. But her friend agrees, saying they're monsters to angels in the blink of an eye. Still not the answer she was looking for. So now Sarah attends Noreen's funeral and notices all the mirrors covered in fabric. She goes to the coffin and reaches out to touch Noreen, but is interrupted by Des. The two talk over a drink, and he tells her about his son James. He tells her that Noreen didn't mean Chris any harm that day they encountered her on the bridge. She asks why she thought Chris wasn't her son, and he explains that that's what she did with their son too.
Okay.
He went on saying that she noticed the small changes in her son's behavior, tiny, insignificant things, and concluded that the James they had was not the James she'd raised. He was an imposter in her eyes. So Sarah asks about the son, and he tells her he accidentally hit James with his car when he ran out into the road, his version of events differing from what she already knew. He kisses his wife's hand and thanks Sarah for stopping by, leaving the room. So while running in the woods, Sarah finds Christopher's toy. She goes back to the hole in the ground and looks at it, trying to understand what it is because only after she came across it last time did things change. She sees the ground moving, sinking deeper. So now we see Sarah watching Chris devour a bowl of spaghetti and is visibly confused. She gets up and throws out the rest of the food before asking Chris if he's going anywhere else besides the garden. He says no, but she found the toy in the forest and doesn't believe him. So she asked about the toy and he's not responding.
So how's Chuck doing?
He remains resolute in his story of not going to the forest after being asked again. And she pulls out the toy and says no more lies, but he insists that he's not lying. She's badgering him, and he keeps telling her he's not lying until he eventually pushes the table into her. Well, now she's shocked, but he says sorry before leaving the room. Now, after having a relaxing bath, surrounded by candles, Sarah walks the halls of her house and suddenly hears a noise. She turns and walks towards Chris's room. Instead of going to it like a normal person would, she gets down on the ground and looks under the door. She watches a spider walking across the wooden floors, before seeing her supposed son's hand imitating the spider's movements, which is very unlike him. She watches him scurry around the room on all fours before jumping on his bed. Now she looks through the keyhole and sees him eating the spider. I'd say she wasn't feeding him enough, but we know that's not true. Now freaked out, understandably, she stands up and slowly backs away. And making the noise on the creaky wooden floor, Chris calls out to her. So she runs away, hiding from her child, terrified.
Mommy? Is that you?
He says good night to her in the creepiest way possible. So we come to the next day. She gets the doctor to come around and check up on Chris. He tells her he's fine, and when she explains why she thinks something's wrong, he starts to question her mental state instead. He continues to ask about Chris's father and the true origins of her scar. So now in town, she's trying to go about her normal life. But this feeling is gnawing at her. She goes and she buys a camera. Now at home, she's watching her son as he laughs at the TV show. And in his room, she looks around for a hidden spot where she can place the camera to see what's really going on while he supposedly sleeps.
What are you doing, Mummy?
She takes out one of the bricks and places the camera before hiding it. Chris sneaks up on her and asks what she's doing. She then immediately grabs his laundry and leaves the room. And while hanging up the laundry, she sees her son creepily staring at her from his window, so she awkwardly waves at him. And that night, she didn't take her pill. Instead, she works through the night finishing the wallpaper. So now the next morning, while her son's eating cereal, she apologizes for acting weird the last couple days. And Chris starts being weird again, breathing heavily while moving his hands closer to her face. She says his name, but he puts a finger on her lips, telling her to be quiet as he moves her hair and touches her scar. If that's not creepy as all hell, I don't know what is. He then puts his finger into it violently, causing her to bleed, and then she wakes up. She's hearing Chris practicing scales. Nothing creepy about that. She looks at him as he brushes his hair. So now we're at the talent show, and Sarah sits in the audience, present but not entirely. She's watching her son perform with his class. And now she's seeing a different performance than the one he's actually giving, like she's alone in the room with Chris.
On the branch on the tree.
Maybe she is losing her mind. Sarah runs through the halls of the school, trying to escape, but all the doors are locked. She's interrupted by her friend. She tells her that the Chris they all see is not her son Chris. Her friend suggests they go for a walk, because when you aren't convinced that your child is your child, a walk is a solution. So Chris appears with his teacher, who asks what she thought of the show. Personally, I wasn't impressed, and clearly, neither is she. Sarah's remaining silent, staring at her son before she runs off. Awkward. So she's driving home and gets the camera. She's looking through the footage and is rattled. She goes to Des and tells him that what happened to his son James might be happening to Chris. He argues that nothing was wrong with James, but she asks him to just look at the footage. He finally agrees and watches it. She's pressing him, asking if he sees it.
There was nothing wrong with James.
And while it looks like he sees something, he eventually tells her he doesn't see anything strange. Well, she's arguing that Noreen was right, and eventually Des explodes. Fuming, he throws that camera on the floor. She says to tell her if she's wrong or crazy, but he says he can't, and he walks away. So she grabs the camera and goes home. So now at home, she's trying to salvage the footage from the camera. Chris is asking why she ran away from him at school. And she says because she didn't feel well. And when he asks if she's better now, she says yeah. She asks if he's hungry, and he says yes. So she's gonna make his favorite. But before she makes him something to eat, he touches her face and hugs her. She makes him food and they eat together.
Dinner's ready.
Now, she's made him something he hates, but he doesn't realize her trick and eats it like normal. So later on while watching TV, he's yawning and sees his mother standing in the doorway. She tells him that they haven't played their game in a long time, but he remains silent. She counts down, but he doesn't do the same. And when she gets to 1, he's not doing anything. Sarah's had enough. She tells him that he's not her son. And he approaches her, as she repeatedly says it to him. He starts crying, before running up to her and throwing her to her side, tossing her around the kitchen. So now Sarah wakes up and sees Chris digging. He approaches her and drags her, burying her head in the sand. And he lies down, succumbing to the medication Sarah put in his dinner. The little monster had been spiked. He should have done his research and avoided that food like the real Chris. So Sarah wakes up, getting out of the dire situation in time. He remains asleep and she's dragging him back to the house. She takes him to the basement and then backs away, collecting a mirror before walking towards him again. She puts it to his face and it reveals a monstrous reflection. He gets up and looks at her. She asks where her son is, and he attacks her. Well, she's fighting back and seemingly knocks him out before this creature starts screaming. Escaping this sound, she locks up the basement and goes upstairs. Eventually, it dissipates.
What have you done with him?
So now Sarah returns to that hole in the ground. She goes into that hole and allows herself to sink in deeper in hopes of finding her real son. Inside this hole, she's looking for Chris, traveling deeper and deeper. Eventually, she comes across the remains of other victims before seeing Chris, alive but unconscious. She grabs him and hears the noise of the changelings in their monstrous form, rising to attack. She's trying to escape, but they're chasing her down the tunnels. She continues to drag Chris and fend off these hideous beasts until she's shocked to see them take on her form. So now, having escaped with her son, she wakes him up before running home. Sarah turns to the car, but finds it locked. She puts Chris down and runs inside to get keys. She hears the changeling trying to escape, so she does the only thing she knows will stop it and burns that house to the ground before taking Chris and driving far, far away. So some time has passed. Chris and Sarah are in a new home and a new life. One day, while Chris is playing outside, Sarah's taking some pictures of him and notices a blur on his face. She wonders if it means anything bad, and we see her home covered in mirrors. In all fairness, she was taking pictures while he was riding around, so, what was she expecting? She may have escaped, but what happened remains at the forefront of her mind forever. The Hole in the Ground was released in 2019 by Wildcard Distribution. It stars Yana Kerslock, James Cosmo, and James Quinn Markey. What would you do if you realized your child wasn't your real child, but instead a monster? Let us know in those comments with the hashtag CinemaRecap.